The bigger carrots over there, there's 3 different types, and they are all seeded on the 2nd of June this year, which is actually fairly late. But when you go there, I should actually go and grab one for you guys. The carrots have sized up in the last 2 weeks, like I couldn't believe it. Now over here, these 4 beds are 2 different varieties that I seeded only July 2nd. And I grew lots of carrots before I came here. And growing carrots late is always a challenge. If the weather isn't right, they might not size up. But these have actually like tripled in size just in last week and a half. And they still have a month, so we'll see. They may make some roots, they may not. I'm just trying it so I know for next year what's the latest I can seed with still getting a harvest or not, right? Let's see, it's always a little bit of a surprise when you pull out the carrot. Here's one. Another one. They're pretty decent size. So this would be the one variety. Okay. Let's see if we can get another one here. Yeah, they're still a bit smaller, but they're coming. 3 different varieties. All seeded within 2 hours of each other.
Wow.
All watered the same. They had the same sunshine, the same air, the same everything, okay? But you can see what a difference. Welcome everybody to our first full day of the camp meeting here at AD. Today I'm gonna give you a tour of the garden and just show you around a little bit of what's growing and what we've been able to accomplish with the Lord's help this year. And I think you'll be very excited seeing all the things that are growing out there. So just come along with us and see what's happening out there. Just come along with me. We'll go up here to the small greenhouse. We'll start there first. And I'll just give you a little bit of a rundown what's happening there and how it's come about. So maybe just a question up front. Who of you guys have grown a garden before or do grow a garden currently at home? Just so I have a little bit of an idea where we're at as a group. Looks like quite a few of you. That's awesome. I love growing a garden, and I believe my great-grandma really put that into me. When I was about 4 years old, she had a decently sized garden and she was growing food all the time. And she would take me to the garden. We lived right next door. And she would show me how to take seed from lettuce. And she would make me hill the potatoes in the fall, dig them out for her. And she would make different teas with herbs. And she was just doing amazing stuff. She would grow lots of flowers. And she would always go to the neighbors, especially the elderly that were not able to grow a garden anymore, and she'd bring them flowers and she'd bring them fresh produce and whatever, and she always had enough, and she lived off of that garden. And when I was little, I would help her, and that really impressed me, and I really loved doing it. So as I grew up, I started making a bigger garden on my parents' farm, and then I begged my dad, can we get a greenhouse? And so we got one, and we got a second one, and we did lots of stuff, and eventually we moved to a bigger farm somewhere else, and we grew even more so we could help our neighbors and we could bless others. And then I went to school for horticulture and agriculture. And then I worked for different companies. That was all back in Austria. That's where I'm originally from. And then God called me over here to Canada in a very special way. And that would be another long story to tell, but it was very awesome. And so I've been here in Canada since 2015. And I've worked on another farming operation before I came here, and now I've been here since last fall. I moved here with my wife and our 2 boys, and so this is the first year of doing the whole market garden farming growing at AD here. So there's been a lot of infrastructure that needed to be built up and set up, lots of systems that need to be put in place, lots of tools and equipment that needed to be brought in so we can actually get started. And that all takes time, and everyone who grows a garden knows that garden is not something that happens on its own by, somewhere on the side. Like, you have to put effort and time and investment in there. So this little greenhouse here was pretty much built from scratch by me and some other guys here this winter. We started in February, and the reason for that is we needed a small greenhouse to start the seeds. And you need to be able to heat it, because up here we have, like, this lake only melted middle of May. The ice was over there all of April into middle of May, and we still had night frosts even into early June. So you can't really start anything without heat in there. So we built this small greenhouse. It's all pretty much built out of wood, and then we used the seed channel with the spring wire in there to secure the plastic on it. And I did a little bit of a rough estimate on the cost of this, just for the materials. And I would say it's safe to say that the structure itself with plastic and the walls and kind of the framework itself be less than $3,000 altogether. So that's not too bad if you compare it to, if you buy a greenhouse from a supplier, that will cost, that size, I actually had it quoted out, that size will cost you about $8,500 just for the parts. So if you want to start and you don't have the funds right now to start with something really nice and strong and long term, you can get wood and you can build this. And yeah, it'll take a little bit of time. You might lose a little bit of time on the building, but if you have the time, that can really be a good way to start it. And we had a wood stove in there. We still have it in there. And we had some electric heaters in here as well. When it's just a little bit cool and the wood stove would be too much, it helps to balance. Or when it gets really cold, you heat with both and then you keep it up. So this is where we started all the plants this spring. And then once it was warm enough, we moved them over to the big greenhouse and planted some in there. And then we also moved a bunch out on the field that are transplanted into the field. So whoever likes it really hot, you can come in here for a second, have a look. There's not much in here right now, but so I like to use tables for the starter plants because I can put a heater underneath, and then the last table still has the framework on it. I would throw a plastic that goes over the whole thing and all the way down to the ground. And then I put a heater underneath, and it slowly heats up, and it comes through from underneath, and it heats up the plants and the soil really nice. And then as it gets hotter during the day, I have to open it up. At night I close it again, and that helps me to keep it warm. Even when it gets really cold, it might get almost freezing in here, I'll still be able to keep that under the table warm there. So here's just a couple starter plants that I'll use for a demo later in the week for our seeding workshop. Right now it's very hot in here, and during the summer it's actually, for most plants, too hot in here actually. So if we had some more ventilation and more sides to open, we could grow stuff in the ground. But on the table here, this is really pushing it. Today is not as hot, but when we have like 35 degrees outside, things are not going to be very happy. So that's why there's not much in here right now. We had to set up a little water system because we don't have a water line coming right here. So I would pump water in here from outside from a tank, and then we had a little pump set up, and that's enough to water most of the plants. And in the wood stove, we forced cold air into the stove on the bottom around the burning chamber. And then the hot air was coming out the top, blowing in here. And then I had a few fans, one is still here, that would help circulate the air in here so that when it gets cold in the night, the cold doesn't start crawling in on some corners, and certain spots freezes faster than others. So by keeping the circulation up, you don't have the heat just sitting up there and it freezes everywhere. It kind of keeps everything warm. And also, you need a decent bit of moisture in the air for stuff not to dry out too fast. But with moisture always comes the danger of disease on the leaves once they come out. So with the fans, you're keeping the airflow going, and that keeps the leaves dry, and it helps the plants to be a lot healthier when it comes to foliage disease. So I think that's kind of the big overall picture here. We do have a little planting table here. This is where I would take potting mix. I put it up there, and then I can transplant plants. I can seed trays. I can do whatever work it takes up there. And I like it nice and high, so I don't have to bend down. because if you're doing it for many hours every day, then you gotta have it good ergonomically too, right? So that's kind of what we have in here, and here's just a little special for you guys. There's a lettuce seed that fell down when seeding lettuce, and this is a normal leaf lettuce. It has grown up how many feet? Probably 4 probably. And it's just going to flower now. So if you haven't seen before what it looks like when lettuce goes to seed, this is it. It has yellow flowers, and when they dry up, there will be little seeds with hair on it. It almost looks like the seeds of dandelion. And if you grab those out and clean them, you can seed them and you'll have lots of lettuce next year. So this is kind of one of the things that came up without any care. It just lived off the water that sprayed past watering the other trays in here. And yeah, it's kind of cool. So we left it. Okay, so if you guys want to head back out this way, and then we'll go over across the road to the other side and check out what's over there. So here's our first field for this year, and it kind of goes all the way down there to the greenhouse. So this was pasture last spring, was probably similar to what you see right here. There's been a little bit of work done before, but we had lots of rocks like I mentioned earlier, so we got a stone crushing machine behind the tractor, and it helps to process the stones down to fine gravel and fine stone powder almost. Now that being said, it only goes so deep at a time. So when you go for rototill, you bring new rocks up. So you'll still find lots of these guys around here, but a lot of them look like this now, which is a lot easier to work with, right? So one thing that's really nice about the stone crusher, it brings lots of minerals in the soil because it breaks the rock apart a lot. So the first year after that, you actually get a bit of a boost with minerals because there's so much available and the plants can take it up better. So here's our potatoes right now. We planted them a couple months ago, so they'll be done pretty soon. But we had a very cold, long spring this year. So a lot of things had to be planted later, and a lot of things didn't grow for a while because it's just cold. So these are still growing right now, but some of them further out are slowly starting to dry down and get a bit yellow. So that means they're almost done growing there. This actually was a pretty cool thing. We had all the staff come out for like an hour and a half. All the potatoes here, everyone take a bucket and one a shovel, one a bucket, and we just go and one makes a hole, put the potato in and make the next hole, and within an hour and a half all these rows here were planted. So that was really awesome. Last year when I came to visit up here the first time for the interview, they had a couple of rows of potatoes that they planted last year, and they were planted actually pretty late because they didn't get to it sooner. And when they told me that, I'm like, wow, those potatoes are probably not going to be that great. Well, when we dug them out, each plant had between 6 to 8 potatoes this big. They were just beautiful. So that gave me the first bit of hope that we can grow stuff up here, because we're quite high up on the mountain. We're like, if you think in feet, we're over 3,500 feet in elevation above sea level. If you think in meters, we're about 930, 940 meters above sea level. So it's not down there, it's a bit up there. So that changes the picture in the growing season quite a bit from what I've found this year. But praise the Lord, there's a crop coming, so that's good. So we can move on this way, and then there'll be a little walkway in there I'll show you guys, and then we can kind of cross through there. So over here there's a couple more beds. We actually just reseeded some new stuff just last week, and you can see little rows of stuff coming out. So we planted some kale and some arugula, a couple rows of spinach, even some peas and red beets. And if you look carefully, you'll see little rows of stuff coming out here. Those are crops that can be direct seeded very easily. And over the time, I found that some things will grow better if you direct seed them than if you start them in the greenhouse and transplant them, such as red beets, obviously potatoes, you just plant them right in the ground. Carrots for sure. They really like to be direct seeded. And even some of the other crops, if you can direct seed them, corn, they'll do way better than if you start them in the greenhouse, because they grow right in there and they're happy in their spot. And especially root crops, if you transplant them, you might disturb the root and then you won't get a nice root to grow up. So some things, just seed them straight in and they'll do really good. If you look here, we have some spinach just popping out today, and a little bit more different variety right here. And we got some radishes here. And then we can probably walk. So this here is a little bit of a walkway. So if you guys want to walk up here, we can go to the middle and then cruise down this way there. So I don't know how many of you have grown onions before. A few of you. Okay. So this was what it can look like when you grow onions. We did start those from seed, and we started them in the greenhouse, and then we transplanted them out here, and they have started growing real nice now. So with the onion, you can buy the little bulbs in the store, and most people do that, and that's fine. I have found that when you buy bulbs, you can sometimes bring in a disease that's rotting the roots and rotting right into the bulb. And then you lose your crop. And you think you have a nice crop, and just before they're done, they're all rotting out and you have no onions. That happened to me actually a couple of years ago. So what I started doing is I started finding different varieties of onions that are sold in seed. And then I buy the seed and I start the seeds. You have to start them fairly early. And then you transplant them, and then there's a pretty high chance that you didn't bring any disease in. And then if you keep them healthy and clean and you don't flood them too much, they like water, but they don't like to sit in water, then you will usually have probably almost no disease in there. I've had really good results with it. So if you have time, if you have a greenhouse and you can, I prefer to grow them from seed just because it leaves all that mold and the rot out. But if you get nice bulbs and they're clean, then that can be definitely an option too.
Can you use seed from the plants and reseed them next year?
Yes and no. You can always use the seed, but if you harvest it too early and it's not matured, then you might not get good germination or none. And the other thing is, if you buy hybrid seed and then use the seed from that, you may not get the same results next year. It will, like you have a white onion that's very big and nice and sweet and juicy. Well, if you take seeds from it and it was a hybrid, next year you might get some that are small, some that are big, some that are not sweet, some that are really spicy. Some might grow really well, some might be really weak. Some might almost not taste like onions. So if you have good seed that's heirloom seed, then definitely, yes. And the onions will go to seed. Some of them will go to seed when you plant them like this. Sometimes you might have to replant them next year, the bulb, and then they'll go to seed very fast. But I've had some that I planted like this, and then the occasional one pops out somewhere and makes seed already. But yeah, you can use that for sure. You just want to make sure that you dry it very well before you store it, because if they start molding or if they get wet and you need to store them really well, and then yes, you can use them for sure. The main thing with the onions is you want them to grow lots of greens in the first part of the growing season, because each leaf is a layer on the onion. And so if you can grow lots of greens, then when it comes time to make a bulb to store for survival mode, then you'll have a nice bulb. Now, I will say one thing that I found with onions. There's a lot of different varieties out there. And you might not believe it, but there's varieties that are good for the north here, and there's varieties that are good for the south and even further down. So there's something called like short day and long day onions. So these onions that we're growing here, they need a long day to mature. So as we're far north here, we have long days in the summer. Like the sun comes up at like 5 in the morning and goes down at like 9:30 in the evening, right? And then as the day starts getting shorter, they're like, okay, fall is coming. Let's get ready, right? If you grow short day onions here, they might not do as well because they need that nice calm day, 6 o'clock sun up, 6 o'clock sundown kind of thing, right? So they're dependent on the daylight. So there's varieties that need long daylight hours to grow and to mature, and then there's varieties that need it shorter. So you want to look at your geographic location and then pick seed according to where you're located, and that will really help you to get ahead with getting a good crop.
That's the zones.
The zones, that's right. So there's a lot of seeding companies that will actually give you a map and they show you the zones, and you can find yourself where you are, and then they'll suggest which varieties are better for what zone, and that can really make a difference. Plants will take time to acclimatize. So once they get used to the climate, they will perform better. So if you can take your own seed and use them over and over, you will end up having plants that know when it gets cold, and they will be ready before then. So if you have seed that's grown somewhere way crazy far, you might have a bit of a harder time for the plants to be really good the first year. But overall, if you kind of follow the rules of, for the onions example here, short daylight hours and long daylight hours, you pick the right varieties, you will have a way better start already. So that's kind of that.
What do you do to manage pest control?
Pest control?
Yeah.
There is many things you can do. Overall, I like to try to have a mix of stuff in my garden and not just grow one field of one crop. There's also there's actually quite a list of things you can do, and it depends a little bit on what pest you have. I like to do it naturally, and there's different remedies you can use. There's like, you can make a spray with garlic. You can make there's some sprays that use soap, and if you're happy with that, that can really help with aphids and stuff. What I found too is pests come when your crops are not happy, right? And so when your crop is not happy, what I mean by that is when the crop is either it's way too hot and too dry, or the crop is missing minerals or some nutrients, or your crop is way overdue for harvest and you didn't harvest it, right? So those can be problems that add up to the pest pressure. Another thing is also to keep your garden clean and to take all the leftovers and stuff out of it. So don't leave like half-cut fruits and vegetables laying around. That'll attract all kinds of stuff. There is a biological insecticide that we do use sometimes when it's necessary. It's pretty much like you could literally drink it and it wouldn't hurt you. Now, I wouldn't say you should do that, okay? But it's basically a bacteria that can only live in a very alkaline environment. And a lot of the beetles and caterpillars that we have that, for example, bug our cabbage or kale or that kind of thing, they have an alkaline stomach. So if you use these bacteria and you spray them on that and they eat that, those bacteria will kill them from the inside out within a couple days. But if you eat that, your body works on an acidic system, and as they arrive down there, they're already killed. So these bacteria won't do you any harm, and they'll be off the plants within 1 to 2 weeks.
My sister, they were using milk powder mixed up to milk.
Yeah.
And they would spray it on their whatever. But it would, the aphid, was it aphids? Or I think?
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't digest it. Yeah,
Okay.
so yeah, and it was
Yeah,
totally
so
natural.
there's a lot of natural remedies out there, and there's books about that. We do sell some books that will help with that as well. In the store, you can look around, ask. There's books for seeds, for choosing seeds, how to grow your own seed, and also about other gardening areas. But yeah, overall, for the pest control, I find that watching and checking your garden quite frequently will help you to catch it early, and then you can decide what do we need to do to take care of that. But overall, once you get to the point where your soil is really healthy and your plants get what they need, then they will have a lot less pest pressure. And later on this week, we'll talk about that in one of our workshops. And it's very interesting. The plants actually send a signal, a frequency out that will attract pests when they're sick, when they're deficient of stuff. And when they're healthy, they'll actually send another frequency out that will actually not even attract them. So usually when you have pests, there is something more to address than just the pest itself. And that takes a little bit of studying and can be very specific to the case. So it might be hard to give you a very good answer on that, but it's definitely most of the time connected with the soil too. So when the soil is healthy and when you have nutrients available in a form that the plant can actually take up, then your plant will be well fed and it'll be healthy. And when the plant is healthy, your pest pressure is very low. So that's kind of the principle that I like to follow. Now here we just tilled up the soil. We're starting from scratch. Overall, I'm very thankful because believe it or not, I haven't had a single potato bug up here, no beetles. And I think it's partly because of the location and the elevation, and also because probably no one grows potatoes around here much. But we haven't had a single bug here yet, so I'm very happy about that. If they did come, there's a couple different things. You can use powderized stone. What is it called? Stone powder. It's like almost a stone meal. Like they grind it up very fine, and if you spread that on there, it will get into all the pores and it won't make them want to move, and then they'll kind of starve themselves. But you have to apply it every time after it rains because the rain will wash it down. There's other organic sprays that you can find in the market that can be pretty effective too. And another thing that I like to do is just get everyone together and we'll pick them all up. Okay, well, let's keep walking down this way. You see a little walkway here. This is where our hose reel cart pulls down every time we water the field. You can see the little blue machine over there. We pull the hose out all the way here, and then there's a big sprinkler that sprays, and it pulls back slowly, and it covers half of the field in one pull. So that really helps me out not to have to move so many little sprinklers. Okay, so here you can see there's some basil growing. Now it was planted very late, and basil likes the heat. So it's just starting to get a little better and happier, but it's growing. Here we have arugula, and that's just about ready to cut for greens. So you can make salads, you can eat it on your bread, you can make smoothie, whatever. If anyone wants to, you can grab a leaf and try it. It'll give you some good taste. It'll have some spice to it already. So we seeded that, and then we also have some red Russian kale here that can also be cut for salads and kind of baby leaf, whatever you use them for. Over here, we have 2 beds of spinach, and you can see I tried 2 different varieties, and this variety didn't do as well with the heat. So you can see there's spots missing. It was just too hot and too dry. Even though I water it, the germination wasn't what I would want it to be. The other one didn't exactly do perfect, but it do quite a bit better. You can see there's a lot more that germinated. So one thing that I always stress is, if you grow a garden, try out different varieties and see which one does best for your garden. Some might do way better than others, and why would you fight it if you can just get the right variety and it grows way better for you, right? So that's just one of the trials we're doing where you can see, okay, this one doesn't look bad, but this one grew a lot more plants, right? We have some radishes here, and they have actually come out really good. They're about this size now. There's some bigger ones further down that we grew, but these are a really easy crop, and you can direct seed them as much as you want all summer long. They'll grow very fast, and you can even mix them in between other crops to help shade out the ground, and when you pick them out, the other crop will close in. Healthy, tasty, and if they get enough water, they'll be so soft. If you run them too dry, they'll get a bit woody and have fiber in them. So the key for those to be nice is probably water and then heat.
Can you use the lake water?
Yes, we do have access to lake water down there, and we pump that up with a tractor, and that's how we irrigate this field. And now with the heat being here, we have to water it probably twice a week. If it's not too hot, then we slow down a bit, but you need a little bit of water to grow even if it's not excessively hot, right? Over here we have red beets. There's 2 beds of beets that are going to be round, and then 2 that are going to be more like a long cylindrical shape. So we're trialing those. Beets need a decent bit of water to start up, but then once they grow, you actually don't want to water them too much, because you want to force them to make big roots to store up for that dry time. These were direct seeded, and we were playing with the settings on the seeder a bit. And for my personal preference, I think we got a little bit too much seed in to grow big bulbs. But if you like small baby beets and you like to use the greens, then that would be just fine. We do have some more beets in another spot that I'll show you later that were spaced out much better, and they're slowly starting to size up. And once it gets cooler, they'll really pick up the speed and just size up. So here is some China cabbage. It's actually doing okay. It hasn't started bulbing yet, but it's growing pretty good, and thankfully we don't have too much pest pressure on there, so their leaves are still intact. For the rest here, this is our lettuce section. Well, we have all the different lettuce that we're trying out this year. We have oak leaf lettuce, we have just the normal standard romaine lettuce, we have different other types that are red leaf, all kinds of things. We even have a Salanova type that we're trying out this year as well. And then here we did one bed where we have the green onions mixed in, and so far it's actually doing pretty good. One thing that I found is you always want to try to give yourself enough space to hoe it so you can keep the weeds down. So if you go too close and your hoe doesn't fit in there, you're gonna pick the weeds by hand, and that can really cost you a lot of time. So if you can keep enough space to hoe it, all of this has been hoed 3 times since planting, and it's still pretty clean. Like, we haven't done anything but hoeing and pulling some of the bigger weeds, just like this one, for example, got missed last time. So we pull it out, and then that's it. So believe it or not, there's a lot of edible plants in the garden that will grow naturally without you doing anything, and you can eat them. This is one of them, and there's quite a few others that you can eat, and they're actually really healthy, and some of them will have more nutritional value or minerals in them than some of the plants that you grow. So it's definitely something to look into. I do suggest that you make sure you know what it is, and that you don't eat like some of the night shadow ones that are like the big cousin of tomato. You don't want to eat those plants, you know. But there is a lot that are edible, so once you're sure that you know what it is and you eat it, it's great to add to your salads or to any other meal that you make. So a couple more brassicas here, lots of kale coming on, some cabbage as well. And this is a very interesting kale type that we're trying this year. I don't believe in the name. It's called Black Magic. But it's a very dark colored kale. It's supposed to be quite hardy and good tasting. So we have a little bit more than a row here that we're trying. So far it's doing good. This is the normal kale that everyone knows. And for those of you who have a garden of grown kale, you know you can keep harvesting the leaves off, let it grow up, and they will still be alive when it freezes. And if there's enough snow, it might even make it through the winter fine.
Correct.
So I've had people that covered it, and in the spring, when the first sun came out, there was already new leaves and they could eat off of it again. So kale is a very hardy plant, very easy to grow, and very tasty. You can make a lot of things like kale chips, salads. You can make smoothies, all kinds of things. So really good to grow. I would always have that in my garden for sure. So here's some more red beets that were planted more spaced out. I did actually try to pre-start those in the greenhouse because we're using a system called paper pot transplanting system. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. And we tried it out this year, so we'll find out how they're doing. I see that they're growing up here. They're not very big yet because there was a couple too many in this one. But those are the cylindrical ones, and they still have about a month, so they'll still size up here pretty good. I'll leave these here for now. Okay. Some more salads. And here's spinach. And I forget the exact date, but this was only seeded about 2 weeks earlier than the one up there. And it's growing pretty good. We've started harvesting some already. Here's something that a lot of you might like is the peas. This is our second seedings that are just in flower right now. Planted a couple here. And then here's some flowers that probably most of you know. Marigolds. They're really handy in your garden. If you have problem with slugs or snails. If you plant those around, they don't like that smell. Also, other bugs and other pests. If you plant these in your garden, sometimes they might be attracting the pest away from your crop, and sometimes they might keep the pest completely out of your garden. So something here, I had a couple helpers and they just helped me plant them in real quick. So they're just right here for now, but very easy to grow. And you know what? Let those flowers dry up. You can take the whole thing and it will be full of seeds and you can plant them next year again. It's not something where you need high quality, so you don't even have to buy them. If you buy them one year, they're really cheap and you just reseed them every year and they'll make your garden look nice and they'll help your garden to stay healthier as well. So here we have some dill. First flowers are coming out now. Dill likes it very warm. It does not like the cold. It can actually die on you or get really sick or have lots of aphids. If it's too cold, it does not like it. So I like to plant the dill fairly late and they'll catch up. But if it gets cold, it's not happy. So we transplanted some out here. And then this here is parsley. You guys know parsley? There's two types. One is the type that will overwinter for you and grow for a couple of years in a row. But most types that you buy in the store, like if you buy starter plants and stuff, they will just be an annual crop. So the winter will basically knock them out and they won't come back. But parsley is very good for different seasonings to have in your salad, and I really like it. And it's pretty simple to grow. I've never really had any issues with pests or anything on it. It's pretty disease resistant. And it's something that you can, obviously you might not need that much, but something that I like to have in the garden as well. So this here over here is our carrot trial this year. The bigger carrots over there, there's 3 different types and they are all seeded on the 2nd of June this year, which is actually fairly late. But when you go there, I should actually go and grab one for you guys. The carrots have sized up in the last 2 weeks, like I couldn't believe it. Now over here, these 4 beds are 2 different varieties that I seeded only July 2nd. And I grew lots of carrots before I came here. And growing carrots late is always a challenge. If the weather isn't right, they might not size up. But these have actually like tripled in size just in last week and a half. And they still have a month, so we'll see. They may make some roots, they may not. I'm just trying it so I know for next year what's the latest I can seed with still getting a harvest or not, right? Let's see, it's always a little bit of a surprise when you pull out the carrot. Here's one. Another one. They're pretty decent size. So this would be the one variety. Okay. Let's see if we can get another one here. Yeah, they're still a bit smaller, but they're coming. 3 different varieties. All seeded within 2 hours of each other.
Wow.
All watered the same. They had the same sunshine, the same air, the same everything, okay? But you can see what a difference. For carrots, the 2 main things that I had was carrot fly and wireworm. The wireworm will make little tunnels into the root. However, if it's only a few carrots in your whole garden, it's probably not a big deal. The other thing is carrots need lots of water when they're growing at the heat now, so that they can mature and size up nice. But you want to avoid them standing in water where there's no air coming into the soil. If it's like sealed up and just like almost like a swamp, they'll not make nice roots and they'll not grow nice. So it's a little bit of a balance. Get them enough water, but let them dry up a little bit once in a while between so that they get some air. But you can see someone might be like, oh, I try to grow carrots and they're just not growing. Well, the right variety might make, what a difference, right? So trial them for your location and then find the ones that work well, and that'll save you half the trouble right there. Yes.
Do they all taste the same?
That's the next level, right? So then once you get to that, you say, okay, I like the greens, they're healthy, they look nice, They sized up well. Now you need to see which ones taste better. For example, I like to grow garlic, and I have different varieties, and then one variety is much smaller, but I can care less because it tastes better, so I like to grow it even if it's smaller, right? So you have to try out a lot of stuff and then find out for yourself what works the best, what tastes the best, and what you also use, right?
So sweetness is not dependent on water or sun, it's the variety.
I would say it's a combination. The sun is very important, and the water will make them sweeter. If it's too dry, they'll be bitter. So you need to give enough water in that growing stage where they're sizing up. What makes them really sweet, though, is the first frost. So if you have a way to harvest the carrots after it froze the first time, and I'm not talking about a frost that freezes the ground hard. I'm talking about a light night frost that kind of starts killing off the weeds and the first little weak plants. That's when your carrot starts getting really sweet. So if you can, leave them in the ground until then, and then harvest them and store them very cool and moist, they will actually even get a little bit sweeter while you store them still. Depending on your location, you can grow carrots that grow very fast or carrots that take a bit longer. And if you're in the south, they actually do grow carrots in greenhouses that are just open end on each side. They're just a bit protected. And they'll grow them over the winter, and they'll harvest them in January, February, March, anything, right? Up here, if we leave carrots in the ground, a good part of them will freeze and die. Some will make it, and they will grow up again, and they'll make a nice white flower and go to seed. But anywhere in that process after the winter, I've tried that several times, they will not be any good on the root. Like the root will be it's frost damaged, it's soft, there's bugs in there, it's not something you would want to eat. But if you're in a climate where they get no hard frosts, you can grow the carrots, you could seed them right now, and you could let them grow into the winter, and then by, let's say, January, down somewhere in the south, you could harvest carrots just fine. Once you harvest them, you want to make sure you take the greens off, but you want to try not to damage the root itself, right? Like this would be okay, but the ideal for storage for carrot would be right at 0 degrees or 32 Fahrenheit and at 98% moisture. So like you need to have high relative humidity, dark, no light at all, cool, and very constant temperature. You don't want to up and down. You don't want to go up to 8 degrees and then come down to almost -1 and that. Just very constant, close to 0. If you live somewhere south where your carrots can stay in the ground, that'll be the best storage. But if it's like we had last year, like this past winter, we had almost, like if you added up, over 5 feet of snow, and we had over a week long of -46, 47, 49 degrees Celsius. Like we were almost at -50 right here. So, you know, you can't store it in the ground here. You have to have it in a storage that's temperature controlled. Right? Yes, a root cellar can be a very good option, but the root cellar, depending on how deep it is and what climates you're dealing with, the root cellar can still get frozen in, so you'll have to watch it. You can't just put it in there and hope it'll last all winter. You have to be there and check the temperature and, you know, cover it more if needed and whatever, right? But usually there's many ways to do it. The most important thing is dark, cool, consistently cool, and enough moisture. Otherwise they'll get soggy and dry out, and then they're no more good. A greenhouse is getting abnormally hot when the sun comes out. And so you have to be careful because you have high moisture in there, the moisture can't escape.
Right.
And then you have this excessive heat, it literally boils things, it cooks them, it burns them, right? So with the greenhouse, good ventilation and keeping the temperature down during the day is key. If plants get too hot, they will actually not produce much either, right? So that could be another reason for the tomatoes that we talked earlier, that maybe they just have it too hot and that doesn't allow them to produce much, right? So, but the ginger is a very hardy plant and it needs heat. Now, I'm not saying it should be 60 or 70 degrees in there, but it likes it hot to where you can almost keep your greenhouse closed for most of the time, yeah.
So what about watermelon, melons? Can you?
So that will depend a little bit on the year and how good care you can take of them.
Yeah.
I would say up here it can grow. It's been done before.
Yeah.
But if the spring is very late and cold, if you put them out a little bit too early, they don't do well with cold and wet. So you might have to wait up here until like end of June, beginning of July. And then you're cutting the season pretty short for them to mature and make fruit, right? But it is possible. Like, I know they have grown some melons here last year. Last year was very hot, very dry, and they had melons up here that were actually pretty good. Yeah. But they need lots of heat. Okay, so we can walk down here to our big greenhouse real quick. So this is our big greenhouse. At this time, it doesn't have any heat except what the sun brings in. This is the first year that we're growing stuff in this greenhouse. And as you can see over here, there was quite a bit of excavation done to get it down to a level spot. So we're in soil that's way down there that has basically almost no organic matter in it. That's quite heavy, lots of rocks. So we've done our best to build up the soil, but there wasn't that much time this spring to do that. So some of the plants will look a little bit better than others, but some of them are struggling with the soil that we're dealing with here right now. However, I'm very happy still that we have a fairly good harvest already. We've harvested quite a few buckets full of tomatoes already. We've gotten lots of cucumbers, and we just harvested them before the weekend, and look how many there are again. It's like full with cucumbers. And they size up, like, it takes less than a week to get from a small cucumber to one that's that big. We have lots of different types of peppers that we're trying. We have some that are called lunchbox. They're really small. They come in different colors. Very sweet and very nice to eat when you eat your lunch or your dinner or whatever. If you just take a little bit of a meal along on a trip or something, very good. We have different tomatoes. We have some that are hybrids and some heirlooms. And it might be a little bit better to show from the other side. So you can either walk maybe on these two walkways or just walk outside and come to the other side. And then we can look from the other side a little bit more, and just so you can see the difference what tomatoes look like if they're a hybrid or just a normal heirloom. Okay, so here's one of our cucumbers that I just picked. This is a European long English cucumber type. And again, varieties can make such a difference. This one, the seed is very expensive. It'll be almost $1.50 per seed probably. But those produce cucumbers like crazy, and they're really nice. They're really healthy. They're just amazing. I've tried them for a couple of years now, and I really like to grow them. So almost half of these are that type. It's called Poniente. It's a hybrid, and different seed suppliers will sell it. And I think it's like, yeah, it's a very good cucumber. It tastes sweet, it tastes juicy, and it's fairly healthy overall. Produces a lot. There's other cucumbers, snack ones that we have, and some other salad cucumbers just for slicing. And they've actually done pretty well too. I'm surprised with how we started here with the soil and stuff and the cold in the spring. Here we have some hot peppers. We have a cayenne type right up front here. And then we also have a jalapeno type further down. We have some tomatoes here that are, this is an heirloom variety. So you can see the leaves look a little bit different, and that's specific to this variety. And the fruit also looks different a little bit. Some of the fruit is a little bit bigger, smaller, cranky, whatever. There's lots of basil right on the outside, like right along the wall on each side. We have some blue basil here, and then the green one on the other side. And then here's some of your hybrids, and you can see it. Fairly small plant, lots of fruit on there. They're all nice and round, all shiny. It's always a little bit of a personal preference. Some varieties that are heirloom will actually grow better than the hybrids, but most of the hybrids will perform better overall for you.
So what do you do to prevent calcium rot and rot?
It starts again with the soil, and what happens is when the weather plays a little bit against you, the plants will have a hard time bringing the calcium to where it needs to go, and then that'll affect your fruit too. So it's not just putting calcium in the soil. You can add limestone powder or other types of calcium, but you have to work the soil so it's available, and the soil has to be built up with compost, with microorganisms, with organic matter that will make the soil, make it available, so when the plant needs it, it can access it easy and good, and then it'll be able to bring it there. But when the plant is stressed with excessive heat, with other problems in the environment, then it can be really hard for the plant to get that right. One thing I found is with tomatoes, they don't like standing in water. And I'm having a little bit of a, I wouldn't call it a bad challenge. It's a good challenge. But this soil is very clay, like I said earlier, and it's not very built up yet. And I'm using drip tape here to water them under the plastic. Plastic is here to help heat up the soil in the spring when it's still cold. And that actually did help pretty good. And it keeps the weeds out. We have weeded this greenhouse once since we planted. And it's pretty good. And then we put the wood chips down to hold the plastic and to have clean walkways where you don't walk in the mud. But with the drip tape, I get the water in very slow. And I had a little bit of a hard time in the beginning to know how much it needs to run. And so I got a little bit overwatered. And then some of my peppers started having a little rot. And some of the tomatoes at the end were really struggling. So then I shut the water off for almost a week. And then they came back and they did a lot better. And then once the heat picked up, now they need water. So now I can water it a lot more and they're happy. Over here, there's some more peppers. And then we also have the eggplant here. On the eggplant also, I tried 3 different varieties. For the last couple of years, this variety called Nadia was my favorite. It did so well. And this year, I was suggested by someone to try another variety that's the same type, just a different variety. And they had fruit like 3 weeks earlier than these. And I was like, why did I always grow this one? So you want to keep trying out things. They still grow very nice, very healthy. And we just picked a bunch off, so there's not a lot of fruit. But if you look over here, there's some decent fruit coming out now. There's another one over here. They're not as big because we picked all the big ones recently, but I'm very happy and I'm surprised how well this actually turned out with the base that we had to start with this spring and the delay with the weather and everything. The basil I just put around the side there. Basil likes hot and lots of sun. And so when I open, it gets more sunlight directly on without the plastic shading it in. And basil can tend to have foliage disease in the fall when it gets moist. So by the side, there's more airflow, so I'm hoping it will dry it out a bit better. And we'll see how long it grows. We did harvest some of that already too now. I pretty much put everything in here that needs decent bit of heat, and that will grow well if it's covered. So we rotor-tilled this several times. We picked all the rocks out, tried to get the soil worked up, watered a couple times, and rotor-tilled it again. We did put alfalfa pellets in. There's a bag here right now. It's empty now, but you can buy them from any feed store. You just get the straight alfalfa pellets. There's some where they add other ingredients to help the lambs to feed and get big fast. But if you just get straight alfalfa pellets, we put a little handful of each of that into each hole where we made the holes in the plastic. Then we also gave it, it'd be hard to say exactly here, but maybe like half a teaspoon of limestone powder to help get the minerals and the calcium in there. And then we did add a little bit of the kelp meal as well. All of these are fairly slow releasing natural options for fertilizing and feeding your plants. And because the soil was quite bad, I just put a little bit of all of them in there and just see where it goes. It does help to take soil samples. That will help you to see where you're at and what you need more of. And I would suggest that if you start a garden, to get a soil sample done and you kind of see where you're at. I wasn't able to do one here this spring yet, but I'm hoping to have some in for next year so we can kind of see what the working or the moving parts are, where we can work on to make the soil better from that perspective. Over here is something that might be interesting to mention still. We have a little hydrant in here in the greenhouse that brings water from our main house, from the water system, from the well. I mentioned that I'm using drip system in here. And for drip tape, you need fairly clean water. If you have water that has a lot of sediment and sand and silt and maybe even bacteria or algae, it will plug up the holes and it won't work well for you. And then you have to pull it out in the middle of the summer. So we use well water that's very clean. I still have a filter there just for safety to see if anything comes through that I don't want in there. And I also put a pressure gauge and a pressure reducer because most of the drip tape needs to run on low pressure. But if you turn it on just a little bit, that might not be enough because once they're all filled, the pressure goes way up and it blows them out. So there's a filter, a pressure reducer, and then a gauge that shows me what the running pressure actually is. And I made a little manifold there, and there's 4 timers. Those are operated by just 2 little AA batteries. And that battery will last you for a whole year, easy. And you can time it how many times a week it comes on, at what time, for how long. And it's very handy because once I figured out how much water these plants need on average, I timed it. And now they're coming on every morning, early in the morning. They get their water, and then they're happy for the day. God has really blessed us. We have a harvest. Things are growing, and we're on the way there. And that's something I think I want to give you guys to finish up here and send it with you on your way. When you garden, it's not like math all the time. And there's a lot of factors that play into it. There's the weather, there's the time you put in, there's the skill and knowledge you have, the experience you have, there's the varieties you use, there's the soil that you're dealing with, and there's a lot of other factors, the weed pressure, the pest control, all these things play into it, right? But the most important thing is that I think is that if you pray and you ask God to help you and you keep going and you try it and you learn and you push forward and you make your mistakes and you learn from the challenges, then as you go, you'll get better and it'll become a real joy growing food. And then when you eat it, you know, like, look, I've planted these seeds, I've planted them in here, I've tied them up, I've pruned them, now I harvest, now I can go home, eat it. It's awesome, right?
Yeah.
So I want to just encourage you guys that if you grow a garden, don't give up. It's not going to be easy. You're going to face challenges where you want to just stop gardening and say, let me go to Walmart or Save on Foods, whatever. It's going to be way cheaper, way less hassle, you know. Might be in the situation.
Yeah.
But, you know, in the beginning, God created a garden for us.
Yeah.
And we had to get out of it. And yet he still said, the ground will be cursed, but you still have to work the soil. You still have to grow the garden to have something to eat. And God didn't give us this task for no reason. I believe he gave us this task so we can learn and he can help us build our character. And so as we garden, it's not going to be easy, but it'll pay off. Even if those plants that first year might not be what you want it to be, it'll still help you to learn something that you need to learn. And so I just want to encourage you guys to keep going with it and push forward and learn and try and talk to other people and most importantly, pray about it. I've really seen what a difference it can make when you pray and you ask the Lord to help you and give you wisdom. And you can figure things out that you would never figure out.
This presentation was filmed at our 2022 camp meeting on site in British Columbia. If you would like to join for the next camp meeting, visit our events page for details. events.amazingdiscoveries.org